We recently sat down with Jared Grooms of Iron Life Ministries, and we discussed current events, and that's what we're going to bring to you today. And one of the questions we ask is, how do we respond to the headlines of the day? I'm Roy Belt. We are men of faith called to encourage. Now let's go into the conversation with Jared Grooms.
We are the church. We are the body of Christ. So wherever we go. So the point going back to training ministers, when you are living a life like that and you're living a life in ministry and you're walking with Jesus, then you take somebody with you on that journey.
Right.
Paul said, follow me. Or you could even say, hey, walk with me as I walk with Christ. Mm-hmm. And then as you're walking with Jesus, all of a sudden, what are you doing? You're learning how he acts. You're learning how he talks. Then you're going to talk that way. And then you're going to say, hey, follow me as I follow Paul and as we walk with Jesus. And the next thing you know, you're imparting what you're learning from Jesus on that journey and what you're learning from Paul on that journey. And then you're imparting it to other ministers, faithful men who can take that, what they've learned from you. And so that's what he was saying. He's like, hey, don't live life by yourself. If you're going to be a minister, you're going to minister, you're going to preach, you're going to witness, you're going to pray for people, you're going to be Christ to the world, in the world, take somebody along with you. Mm-hmm. And then when you're dead and gone, they're going to take somebody along with them, and that's how you impart and continue the gospel.
From a biblical perspective, your biblical perspective, and here, I'm going to caveat this for us to keep us out of trouble.
Right. Okay.
When it comes to eschatology, it's all up in the air.
Yeah.
You can be 100% wrong about what you believe.
Up in the air. You mean rapture?
Oh, would you stop it?
It's all...
Boy, I walked right into that.
All right, moving on.
But it's like, here's the thing, is as long as you believe Jesus is coming back.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so the full preterists, they believe he already came back. And they're wrong. But
right.
Aside from that, as long as you believe Jesus is still to return, I don't really care how you believe it all unfolds. Because you can be wrong. Even R.C. Sproul, as dogmatic as R.C. Sproul was about stuff, he stood firm on his belief that his eschatology could change tomorrow.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And I'm sure maybe it did. When he died, he probably figured out that part of his eschatology was wrong. So, I mean, what are your takes? And I know you kind of mentioned this in a text message you sent to me here a couple weeks ago, and I hope I'm not stepping on your toes as far as like a future like men's group message, devotional, or whatever. But like when we start thinking about the things we see going on in the Middle East and the way some people interpret that to correlate to the end times, like you want to weigh in on...
Well, it's like
where you're at on some of that stuff.
Eschatology is, and I think personally, it's amazing the amount of land that we're talking about geographically. When you talk about the Middle East and Israel and all this, that whole area. I mean, we've got states that are so many times larger than that whole area. Not even the countries. So. It's interesting in that sense, just geographically, what amount of land we're talking about when we're focused on the Middle East. But as far as, the eschatology of it is, I found out when you talk about eschatology in a setting like that, a group setting, or unless it's specifically this is why we're having this Bible study, it turns into I want to show you how much I know, and I want to prove to you how right I am.
Right.
Actually, I went to a church one time, one Sunday morning. It was a friend of mine's church, and we were visiting, and he said, hey, Sunday night, or maybe it was the Wednesday night Bible study, he said, we're gonna study the book of Revelation. And he said, what we're going to do is we're going to forget everything we've ever heard about the book of Revelation, everything we've ever learned, and we're just go into it with fresh eyes. Like it's a brand new book. We've never know anything about it. And I was like, man, that's exciting. I think it's hard to do, but he said, forget everything you've ever heard and everything you've ever learned. And so I was so excited. So my wife and I went there. We walked in, and he handed us a study guide notes, and the top of it said 10 reasons why the rapture is true. And I thought, wait a minute. And not even if you believe or disbelieve, but that's the exact opposite of what he said we were going to do.
Right.
We're going into it with our preconceived notions. And that's the thing. When you look at, okay, do I believe Christ is coming back, pre-tribulation, mid-tribulation, post-tribulation, or is the resurrection and the second coming the same thing? All these things, there's so many nuances to it. And for thousands of years, at least 2,000 years, millions of men, great men with great minds who love Jesus, they disagree on these certain points.
So we sit back and we look at stuff like's going on in the Middle East right now, and it's like, I look for Jesus' return every day. I'm not waiting on Israel to tee off and do something
and
crazy.
It's interesting to look at that and talk about Bible prophecy. So you'll go into Daniel, go into Ezekiel, and different, and it's like, okay, that's, and Jesus says, Matthew chapter 24, when you pull all these together, you think, okay, and then you read the book of, we read what Paul wrote, and the one thing that all these New Testament writers have in common is, and like you said, this is the point, it's like a non-negotiable. You have to believe, because the Bible's clear on this point, Jesus is coming back. But so the soon return, the imminent return, the bodily return right? So Jesus is coming back. And Paul says he's got a reward for them, a crown of life for all those who are looking for him, who love his appearing.
Right.
Now, we may disagree on when he's coming back and the events surrounding that, and that's fine. I'm okay with disagreeing with that if we can agree to disagree, as long as we agree on Jesus is coming back. And every New Testament writer that I'm aware of believed, they seem to write with the thought that they believed that Jesus was coming back in their lifetime, right? Thessalonians, Paul says, those of us who are alive and remain, they believed that, and there's a sense of urgency on their part to Jesus said, he didn't say get ready, he said be ready. And so there's that sense of urgency, and then you're that preach the gospel, go out and win souls because Jesus is coming back. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 7, our perspective or our response to the end times, our response to current events, our response to the news is, but the end of all things is at hand.
Right.
And that's Peter saying.
And Peter wrote that 2,000 years ago.
He did. And that's his perspective. And like I said, all those New Testament writers, they're expecting Jesus to come. James says the same thing, essentially. He says, hey, the end of all things is at hand. Christ is coming back. And he says, the end of all things is at hand, therefore. So he says, okay, with that in mind, that's that connecting word. He says, be serious, be sober, be watchful, in prayer. And then he says in verse 8, above all things, have your theology and your eschatology in order, know exactly what. Oh, wait, that's the wrong version.
Wrong book.
That's my paraphrase.
Was you reading out of the Message?
I was. That's my paraphrase. No, he says, above all things, have love one for another.
Yeah.
So he's saying, you know what? The end of all things is at hand. In other words, Christ is coming back just like he promised. And so with that in mind, how are we supposed to respond to that fact? Pray, be watchful. Because, Peter's writing this. He's saying, watch and pray. And you remember, he heard that in the garden from Jesus, the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus wakes him up and says, hey, what? So that's a message right there.
Right.
He's saying, wake up and pray. Yeah. So that's our response to the end times, our response to the fact that, things are going on in the world. Because if Jesus comes back tomorrow, we want to be ready.
Right.
But if he comes back 100 years from now, we ain't going to be here. We're going to die. So in essence, he's come back for us eventually.
Right.
And we want to be ready. And the way we're ready is watch and pray, and above all things, love one another.
And I guess what is most blatantly missing from that list is fear.
Oh,
so
yeah.
We have a whole culture, especially, and again, I'm not trying to beat on them, but especially in the dispensationalist framework, people are so fascinated with the Antichrist and what's going to come when the Antichrist comes. They're focused on the tribulation. They're focused on all of the hard stuff that they believe is still to come according to the Bible. But here's the thing, and I read this meme on Facebook, and it made so much sense, and it's so valuable. And it's like, if we would spend as much time preparing for Jesus to come back as we do worrying about the Antichrist or whether or not we're going to have to suffer through tribulation, if we would just focus all of that energy on Jesus, how much better off would we be?
Yeah.
It was basically the gist of it.
And that's the thing. And years ago, I mean, in my mid-20s, I'm sitting there reading the book of Revelation, and I'm going to church, or we have Bible studies, and, and that's what they wanted to focus on, different things. And I just had a realization one day that if you read the book of Revelation, and it's the revelation of Jesus Christ, right? If you read that book, and by the end of reading that book, you've learned more about the mark of the beast, the Antichrist, right? The harlot of Babylon, and the tribulation. If you're learning all about that stuff, and that's what you're focused on, and that's what you're hearing more about, instead of Jesus and his triumphal return and his glory and his majesty, then you've missed the whole entire point of the book of Revelation. And you're reading it out of fear. You're reading it with a carnal mind, and the Spirit's not, teaching you because what is it? It's the revelation of Jesus Christ.
I listened to an old preacher say one time, in talking specifically about the book of Revelation, he said the book of Revelation is horrible news for unbelievers. But the book of Revelation is the best news that the believer could ever be given. That Jesus is coming back. So,
and this is the thing, in all his power and glory and majesty, that's like you read that. So, and that's like when I have a Bible study, it's like, I've had plenty of them down through the years, and they're interesting. And I think there's a place for study. I'm not saying we shouldn't study it. We do it in love and in humility and with grace. And it's very interesting, and it's encouraging. They're like, man, this is what God's promised us in the future. But at the end of that Bible study, if there's confusion, there's fear, there's more questions, and you're focused on anything else, but at the end of that Bible study of who Jesus is and what he's done for us, and the fact that he's coming back for us, there's a reward that he has for us. And it's just the fulfillment of the gospel. If the focus is on anything, you're not revealing Christ in that revelation. It's a revelation of carnality, a revelation of fear.
And I guess just to back up something you said there, like, this stuff is all valuable to discuss if you can get a group of people together who are, number one, interested in it. Because when you start talking about some of this stuff and you got people who just don't care, it's not profitable at all. But if you can get a few guys together that are actually interested in digging into the deeper things of eschatology and kind of trying to flesh out and look at what the church has historically believed. And
that's what I love about the men's group, because we're all coming around in a shared community, and the center of that community is Christ.
Right.
The center of it is the gospel and encouraging one another.
Thank you for joining us. And we've been talking with Jared Grooms of Iron Life Ministries. You can hear his podcast on Podbean, Apple Podcast, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Be sure and join him for Iron Life Ministries. I'm Roy Belt. We are Men of Faith, and we're answering the call of 1 Thessalonians chapter 5:11. Therefore, encourage one another and build each other up. And we certainly do thank you for joining us on this episode. And I want to encourage you to start your week off in God's Word and stay there every day.